Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this latest Indica Books Writers Workshop series with Otis. Today is the 22nd of January 2023, and I will turn this over to Otis to review, discuss, and talk about the writing submissions that he has received for this week. Over to you, Otis.
Okay, thank you. I'm just getting my stuff together here. Great. Sweta, I think you sent me two pieces, and they're pretty short, so let's try and do both of them. Let's see, I'm trying to get to this. Just pieces. Sorry, I'm just finding my pieces on my Notability. Okay, here it is. Sorry, it has to, sync up, and it hadn't synced yet. Okay, so let's see. Sorry for the little technical difficulties. Hopefully this is still coming through. There we go. I remember from last time we had a kind of technical problem when I did it that way. Okay, so say this. Okay, Sweta, maybe you could tell us a little bit about this piece, Protest Time.
So actually, this is my basic problem, which is that I just start writing and I write whatever I mean, I don't plan anything. I don't have any story to tell. I just formulate it and then I send it off, and somehow it gets picked up also. But I'm not able to work on longer pieces, and I just realized that I mean, I don't have any pressing story to tell. So there's no story that I really want to tell also. But it's just that sentences keep forming themselves, and this was a very classic example where I just wrote word by word, and I had nothing in my mind. My mind was completely blanked out. So and because of this, I'm wondering if I should even attempt fiction, because I'm not. I mean, unless I should have that need to tell a story, and there should be some conflict or something that should be there, but that seems to be completely missing.
Well, let's not leap to throwing away writing fiction. So I think that what you're describing. I mean, the writing is wonderful. I mean, I love it. I love the sentence by sentence, what's happening sentence by sentence. I love the I don't want to say strange, because I don't feel it's strange, but your mind goes in directions, and your writing goes in directions that are fresh to me. What you're not doing a little bit, it seems to me, is engaging in some construction. Engaging in construction in a story is not having this sort of story to tell. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about. There's this sort of there's this idea in writing that there's a kind of mystical drive that we have, that's forcing us to write our story, and then somehow that's the thing that's leading us. You have that, you have that already, or you wouldn't be typing. I mean, you would be doing something else. You would be, making clay pots, or you might be working in a bank. Whatever it is that drove you would be having you do something else. So the fact that you are driven to write is already manifest, it seems to me, in that you are going to the keyboard and you're typing. I'm not trying to make a big to-do out of it. I don't know that it's a big thing or not a big thing to sit at a typewriter and type. Just as, it's just, you are driven to do it. It's something that you've chosen to do, and it's a habit you've developed. So that's all fine and good. Don't worry about that. I don't know, I haven't really thought about this before, but it's like, so writing is a very linear idea. So when we learn to type kind of at first and we start telling our stories, we think in a very linear way. We type one sentence and then the next. I think that is sort of responsible for these ideas of stream of consciousness and things like that, and maybe not. Stream of consciousness that works, I don't think is just working on a linear path. So there's the linear path that we write with, and then there is an author that's up here, and honestly, they don't have to be a real big deal or anything. They're not super smart. They're not doing incredible things, but they think about constructing a story so that it might start here, and they don't know where it's going to end. They don't know what it's about. In fact, I personally hope they don't know what it's about or where it's going. But they are up here and they understand a need to create this thing that this sort of reductive thing that I call story, that I'm calling story, and I'm suggesting to everyone to sort of adopt, which basically has an antagonist. It has a protagonist that we need to understand, and it has an antagonist. And that the story is about those two forces, whatever they are, often people, because people are a lot easier to dramatize than abstractions, right? Or if there's something abstract, then we use people in order to metaphorically suggest it. But we have this situation of a clash between these two forces that creates, and I think it's a very physical property, really, it creates energy, right? Mm-hmm. These two things moving in space and time don't create any energy. But these two do, because they impact each other. When they impact each other, just as basically as you can think about, something is going to happen. And so when we see it on the page that two forces, antagonist and protagonist, and we understand that this is happening, impact each other, encounter each other, then the reader wonders what's going to happen out of it. And that is basically the story. This, and then what happens. So a story can be very brief, right? It can be a poem in which these forces interact with each other. It can be Wordsworth, seeing, dew fall from the leaf on a summer's day. Okay, so there's Wordsworth, and then there's dew falling from the leaf. And those two impact each other, and from that, Wordsworth comes to conclusions about the universe. Or it can be, I don't know. It can be any situation of protagonist and antagonist, and that's all we're talking about. So I don't want to. I will counsel you not to throw up your hands in some kind of despair that the story is not somehow manifesting itself, and understand that we lead the story a little bit. It is, if you want to think about it this way, it's a little bit of a lucid dream. So we don't have control over everything that happens in the dream, because that is being driven by this linearity, right? Sentence after sentence. And the first time we write those sentences, we have to grapple with them. They might be right, they might not be right, but the dream is like that, sentence by sentence. It's a driving rhythm. Right? It's like a train that we don't have control over. Like the dream. The dream, we walk through a door, then we see, a peacock, and then the peacock turns into our aunt, and then our aunt tells us that we have to go to this cave. Okay, so whatever it is, it's just going. So we have that linearity, and then we also have this sort of superstructure on top of it, the lucidity, right? We don't have a lot of control even over the lucidity, but the lucid part of it is that we understand that we have to have these forces interacting with each other.
Mhm.
I honestly, I actually think it's a worse problem to feel like you have a story to write, know what that
Mhm.
story is, and to write it. I think that's a worse problem than coming in and saying, I don't know how this formulates itself. Because when you know that, you know it's static, you know it's limited, right? I mean, when you come in knowing what story you want to tell and you're like, okay, I'm going from here to here, basically what a hack does, right? Hack writers do this all the time. Hollywood writers do it all the time. They come in knowing the parameters, they know exactly where they want to start and exactly where they want to go. And all of us can. That's going to be limited by us, right? We limit that. And I think that we should try and write stories that, I mean, stories should be a way in which we can expand our own limits. And then we also expand the limits of the reader. We go into a new space with our story, and the reader follows along with us and they go someplace new too. And then we have the proverbial cliche, you know, we as the writer never see the world in the same way again, and
Mhm.
the reader never sees the world in the same way again, and the character never sees the world in the same way again, right? So all three of those kind of go together.
Mhm.
That's you in this piece. We're going to look at your other piece too, and I'll have you read from that one, Swetha.
Mhm.
But in this piece, it's simply a matter of getting those forces onto the page. Once you get those forces onto the page and you understand something about the dynamics, then we can start talking about those dynamics,
Mhm.
right? Are they enough? Do we really understand them? Do we understand that there's an external struggle and an internal struggle, right? The two main platforms for our writing are external struggle, so that the reader wonders what's going to happen in a material way, right? Is
Mhm.
is your character going to be able to rob the bank and pay off the mortgage, right? That's the external struggle. The internal struggle is, why do I care, right? So, and we want to get that on the page too. Is there an internal struggle? Is this important? Or they're just robbing banks and they don't care? Are they just, you know, trying to decode the Da Vinci Code because someone gave it to them as a job? You know, it's just, we need to know that it matters to them, and then therefore pursuing it, and whether they're successful or not successful is going to be meaningful to the human being, and that makes it meaningful to the reader, who is also a human being, so they get to live in verisimilitude with the character. That's why you need both of those things: what's going to happen, and reader experiencing the story through verisimilitude. Or no, maybe not verisimilitude, maybe I mean sympathetic resonance is what I usually say.
Thank you. Actually, that was very encouraging because I really don't, in fact, I don't feel any conflict at all. I was just thinking, I don't have any pain, any suffering that I want to express through writing. So and it has been because actually, especially since really interested in yoga and very keen about it. So I'm usually in a very calm state of mind, and I think that so I what you're saying, it is really important. So it's either I really have to get conflict in and get the antagonist in. But I never even thought in that way. I didn't realize it at all till I attended your classes.
Okay, and I actually even have something to say about yoga, which I also do amazingly.
Mhm.
Um, so even yoga has conflict. We think that it's about relaxing, but
Mhm.
when we move, we actually have oppositional muscles. So whatever we're doing, we're engaged in opposition. There's another important element to yoga too, which is we live within a context of gravity, We would be super relaxed if we didn't have any gravity. We wouldn't even have bones if we didn't have gravity, right? We wouldn't need muscles if we didn't have gravity. All of those things are, there's a larger context, and I think about this a lot. When we're doing yoga, when we move our arm like this across the sky, that is not a relaxed gesture. That is one side of my muscles are contracting and the other side are loosening. I have a lot of trouble personally with the loosening thing. So, like the flexibility that's allowed from actually having those oppositional muscles relax, that is a problem that I have. I don't have a problem with the pulling muscles, right? We all have our struggles, but it's both that make for the experience, not to be too big about it, but the experience of life is created by both sets of muscles and that oppositional experience. And this story is a metaphor for life. So there really isn't, there isn't a story. There is no relaxation. What there are rhythms of tension and release. And that's what we do in stories. And in the beginning of stories, we like to start with the tension because that tells the reader that they're not wasting their time. We could start with release if we wanted to, except for the reader might not read through the 2 pages, chapter, 5 chapters of release. So we start with the tension, write the next one of release. That's usually also what we call the A story and the B story. We have this rhythm, tension and release, tension and release. Again, yoga has that, right? We might hold a pose. I don't know how it is for you, but I have some trouble with some of those poses. Tension.
No, I have with most of the poses, but I meant yoga as jnana yoga, as in the yoga Vashishta and the theory of yoga is what I meant. I didn't mean hatha yoga actually.
Oh, okay. Well, in theory or practice, I think it's going to be. I don't know that there's some. Anyway, well, you know better than I do, but that's my 2 cents about how writing is also like yoga, and so maybe it can inspire you to go ahead and just take it on a little bit. The other thing too, I think it's important for us to take on we have a job basically when we say we're storytellers, and our job, we work for our audience. What we think finally, the thing that directs us is that we believe in a sense that if we write this story, yes, it's tense, and sometimes that's even difficult, and we deal with difficult things, tension, and then release, and we take the reader on this journey that goes up and down, what they call the emotional roller coaster. But I'm calling those emotions tension and release. I'm not saying that they're love and hope or anything like that, or fear, just tension and release in the body. If we take them on that emotional roller coaster, we take them up to a crescendo, and then we have a falling off at the end. It is a kind of false termination, a false sense of closure, but we provide this sense of closure, and with that sense of closure to the experience of the story, the reader experiences what we call catharsis. And so that's a thing, a quantity. I do think a lot about the nature of this, but that's a quantity of emotional experience that we basically give to the reader, give to the audience. And that's our job, kind of, is to provide this sense of catharsis, because basically life is difficult. If you're at a state where you don't feel life is difficult, this sort of yogic experience in which it's not difficult anymore, then you have to bring yourself down, bring yourself back to the people, and realize that the human experience is difficult for people. And we're basically providing a service. We're providing a kind of medicine that makes for this catharsis, for the healing of the audience. Okay, let's look at the other story. Which one was it? This one?
Tangled embroideries, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, can you read a little bit of this? Read up into she's not so sure about the apple. Let's hear the beginning.
Okay. She wanted to try out the street food, chaats, samosas, golgappas, floating in jeera water. The apple was only a just in case. Akriti didn't want to think about the just in cases now, being stranded on a lonely road, getting kidnapped. Yes, she had considered every danger, losing her bag and her purse with it. Her elaborate plan depended on none of the just in cases happening. She picked up the apple from the bag and dropped it back. She would decide later. Akriti let the pencil and the rule notebook remain in the bag. She wanted to list the places she visited and the things she saw. She wanted a permanent keepsake of this trip. She would have liked a camera, something she could hang around her neck, like the tourists she saw when her school took their class on an annual sightseeing trips to Lal Bagh, Vidhan Sauda, and other places of educational interest. As Akriti queued behind her classmates in a line whose straightness was rigidly managed by tired teachers, she would look at the tourists with wonder and envy, imagining how pleasant their lives would be without timetables and classes. She imagined that traveling to new places and taking pictures was all tourists did. Perhaps she could buy a toy camera from one of the roadside vendors in the bazaar, a plastic one with a zoom and aperture speeds painted on it, in a wooden pouch buried in the front zip of her bag. Akriti kept the 50 rupees that would make this trip possible.
Okay, I'll stop you there. Thank you, Sweta. I'm stopping you right before you go into backstory. You notice that? Um, so we basically we have a girl, right? And she's about to, run away on the adventure of her lifetime.
Mhm.
In this scene, we simply have her there getting ready.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
um, you know, think about it again. The story is a dramatic event that is meant to draw the attention of the audience. So, just think about it as you walk down the street, right? You're walking down the street and there's a girl who's preparing to run away from home. You're passing by her and she's like this. Across the street, there's, you know, a shopkeeper runs out of his store and grabs this boy. You stole, I'm going to use your apple. You stole my apple. The boy's like, I
Mhm.
didn't steal it. But, da 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 da. Your attention would be on that. You might look away because you were even embarrassed at how much you want to look at it, right? You might be like, oh, okay, I can't look at that, or maybe I'm going to get in trouble if I know this about. So there's a kind of voyeuristic, drive to know what's going to happen because the audience basically, if they can watch something happening with other people, they can learn something about themselves. Maybe they learn, oh, I should never steal, or maybe they learn, oh, if I steal, if I get caught, I should say my grandmother's sick.
Mhm.
Whatever it is, they learn something from it because we're always learning for the purpose of our own survival. So that's all the situation is here. I love the writing here, but there is not, you don't establish a conflict, and we don't know why it matters. And so she's just doing it. And so for the period of 4 pages, I'm just reading about the character going. I find out some backstory, but we don't really have any momentum on the front story. So backstory, the way I usually think about it is we can have backstory to the degree we have momentum going forward in the front story, momentum, then we can stop that momentum, have some backstory because the reader's like, what's going to happen next? I have to know. So we can have backstory exactly in proportion to the amount of momentum the front story has. If the front story is barely rolling along, and then we have backstory, it stops. It stops. The reader is like, I have other things to do. I if I can't learn about the nature of existence here and help myself in my survival struggle, then I better do the dishes, is basically the way the reader thinks. I love the writing here. I love the detail. another thing that sort of tells us about your style, you know, the linear style that you have, is the fact that there's no paragraphing, right? In this long section, look, if we look at this section from here, and I would like everyone to indent Ashvani. We want to indent on our paragraphs, and then we go just down here. There's no form, and that does tell us that, you know, you have this linear style. You're always sentence, 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 sentence. Sorry, not sentence, sentence. Word, 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 word. And because of that focus, you do pick really wonderful words. I love the words that you pick. But writing for the reader is also about, it's about chunks. So there's form, right? The idea that the story begins here at A and will arc to B, right? Or it has the form of A against B, against the force of antagonism, that will then create an arc to what happens here. So that's the largest form. There's a middle form, which I would describe as being chunks of information, chunks of, remember, tension and release, chunk of tension, chunk of release. We can also call that A story, the outward material story, B, the inward story, however we want to look at it. That chunk idea is represented by chapters that are all about one thing, that have a little mini arc, or sections, or paragraphs. I've said this before, but there's a very good book to read, Strunk and White, The Elements of Style. It's very popular in the United States. It's a little bit dated maybe, but the advice is very good. One of the pieces of advice, the one that I think is most important, make the paragraph the unit of composition. Very important piece of advice. And what that basically means is that when we think of writing stories, we think of steps. We want to take a step, 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 step. Because the reader is actually not getting something from just one word. They're probably not even getting something from one sentence if the next sentence is very different. They're getting sentences in chunks because they need a little time to process. Anyway, that's a big speech, but I think that you're writing beautiful. I love the words. Yep, Abhinav.
So I didn't mean to cut you off, Otis. I was saying that with respect to the point you made on paragraphs, I think this has been said about non-fiction writing, but may equally apply to fiction writing, which is that the structure of a paragraph should be such that if you, say, for instance, were to read only the first sentence and the last sentence of a paragraph, they should feel cohesive. Which means that if you start off a paragraph with an assertion or a point that you're going to make, the rest of the paragraph should build upon it, and you should conclude the paragraph with a statement, with a sentence that sort of takes the points that you have made in the paragraph to some logical point that you can either continue in the next, or you can park it for some time to pick up at a later point. This obviously won't apply just as well to fiction writing, but I think the point is such that, you know, what you said, Otis, that it's got to be a logical unit of composition.
Yeah, I agree with you, Abhinav. I would only edit a small thing in your comment. It absolutely equally applies to fiction writing. So we just have to think about how it applies, because we're writing paragraphs not because of ideas of genre, fiction and nonfiction. We write paragraphs because of the way the human brain works. That's why we write paragraphs. So it's not a genre issue. We understand things. We want to take things in as chunks of information. The tiger is attacking the gazelle. You know, we see that. The gazelle is fleeing, because we can't take everything all at once. But we do want to have the opportunity to be able to process information in a way that is appropriate in time, I guess. One of the tricks that I use, I consider it a trick because I use this sort of, whatever this is, my theory, my philosophy about writing, and I apply it to my own work. I always write the antagonist and the protagonist in separate paragraphs. I do not care if they're just one sentence or not. I always paragraph when I transition between my protagonist and antagonist. That tells me something. If I'm doing that, that's telling me something. If I have a huge paragraph about my protagonist and only one line about my antagonist, that is not an equal struggle. It's not an equal struggle. It's not what the words say, it's how we say it. The representation of this character needs to be full. The representation of this character needs to be full. If I write just one, if I don't have any sentences about my protagonist, then I know that my antagonist is too strong and my protagonist isn't really on the page, I'd like to think. So I use paragraphs and I use everything about our writing process to help me write better stories. It's our medium. It is our medium. Just like painters will use all the brushes that they have, we as writers need to use all the brushes we have. One of the brushes is paragraphs, right? That's one of the brushes. Okay, I love the language here. I think you're seeing yourself this issue of form, and I hope that I'm inspiring you to just try it. Swetha, I've told this story many times in Indic over the years, but when I first was going to pursue my writing, I decided to take a writing workshop with this writer named Barry Hanna, and it was in a place nearby. There was a big workshop at the university, and so I went and I was in the class of Barry Hanna, and I brought my story. I'd been working on it for, I don't know, let's say 15 years. It was a work of genius. And I was so looking forward to bringing it to Barry Hanna and having him basically, fall over dead because I was so elevated in my, and, and I will tell you that he was not that impressed. He wrote in the margins, "Where's the story?" Then he would write, "Where's the story?" Then he would write, "Where's the story?" And then on top of one page, he wrote, "This meanders like a drunk on a bender." I was so angry. I was angry at him that he did not recognize my genius. That, this was everything. I had metaphors about leaves dying. I'm telling you, I did not hold back. It was beautiful. So I went back and I just wrote on the top, I wrote experiment. And I wrote a simple story about a character that wanted something clear. He wanted to go on a date with this girl, this young woman who worked in a plant store. That's all I wrote. Those two things. That story, Barry Hanna thought was successful. And I think a little bit, he's a storyteller, so he crushed me to start with and then built me up afterwards. That might be part of it. But that story did get me into an MFA program. And that story did get published eventually. It was a mess and it took me a long time. I really had to, I had to work to save that story, but I did do the work and it did finally get published. So get fueled up. I hope I've made you as angry as Barry Hanna made me.
No, I'm not angry. I'm as usual not agitated actually. I wish I was a little agitated and wanted to, because that agitation is not coming through in the writing. That's the basic problem. So
you can write sentences. So you have everything you need to write a story. Now you just have to just put a little bit of will on it. But write experiment, say this is the story for that goddamn Otis who keeps giving me such a hard time.
No, but actually, I'm finding the classes very useful because I knew, for example, both the stories that I sent you, I intended to turn them into novels. And that had been my original intention, and I couldn't do it. I mean, despite the fact that they were published and all of that, I couldn't take it further. So I knew there was something wrong with me. But until I attended your classes, I didn't know what it was. So, these classes have been very useful. It's just that I'm not able to apply. I've not reached the application state. I mean, but I found what you're saying is to be perfectly right. It's just that I'm
Okay,
not able to apply right now.
I there's not first. I will just interject. There's nothing wrong with you at all.
Mhm.
Okay, and there's nothing wrong with any of us. We come to our writing by some kind of process that means something. I came by my process. I've been imagining myself a writer for a long time before I wrote my work of genius that I gave to Barry Hannah, and it was the right thing at the right time. I mean, maybe if I'd come there a year earlier, I was 29 or something. If I'd come there a year earlier and Barry Hannah said it meandered like a drunk on a bender, I might have quit. Who knows? We don't know what would have happened. As it was, I said, damn you, Barry Hannah. Everything is working as it should. There's nothing that's not working as it should. We don't have any problems. You're writing these wonderful sentences. You would not be writing those wonderful sentences unless you had allowed yourself to write all those sentences. You could be a hack writer, maybe. You could be writing sentences that are just doing the job. You could be gathering in your protagonist and antagonist and writing a bunch of hack work. That could have happened. You could have taken that path. You didn't take that path. You took the path that I think is somewhat harder. You're writing these sparkling sentences. You have this incredible imagination. So now just apply these other things. They're easy. There's people, you know, when I went to the MFA program, there was this writer and they kept talking about how beautiful his sentences were. I think I've spent my entire life being angry at other people. I was like, damn him. Why does he get to write all these? Why doesn't anyone say to me, I have beautiful sentences? No one ever says that. So it comes as it comes. So carry on, try it, you know, get those protagonists and antagonists on the page. One paragraph with the protagonist, external struggle and internal struggle. You can already write the sentences, you do it already. So I know you can write these sentences. All you do is lead the dream, like a lucid dream, a little bit. The next paragraph, use that paragraph. Oh, the next paragraph, this is this leading the dream. Make it about the antagonist. See where it goes.
Thank you
Okay,
so much.
Ram, let's talk about your work.
Sure.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
You always look so far away, like you're being seen from down a long hallway.
Let me put on my earphones and mic. That will make it better, I think.
No. Nothing is wrong. Everything is fine. I'm just making one of my little comments.
Yeah.
Okay, tell us a little bit about this story.
So this is a story that I had actually written quite some time back. I had written it for submitting it to a contest. This was about 2 years back, and this story was about 2.5 times longer. And I was not too happy at the time I wrote it. I thought it was like a brilliant, and it should. I mean, I thought people should roll out the red carpet and award me the prize and stuff like that. Then, the more I looked at it, I realized that yes, there's a lot of stuff missing in that, and so a couple of weeks back, we were in a workshop with Aditi, and I had submitted this as a writing exercise submission. And I edited the original story to about half the length, less than half actually. So I realized that despite cutting out about 2,500 words from a 4,500 story, it didn't change the essence of the story. So that's when I realized that how much of a tightening is required.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's can you read, do you see this line here? I just made a green line.
Yeah, sure. From there?
Can you read from there to secreted in her sorry, this little section.
Yeah. Where is that? Okay. Rampyari wanted to tell the cleaning woman that no, they had cut out her womb a year ago. She did not know whether she should smile in gratitude or look sad. Such a miser, your husband, the cleaning woman shook her head. The smell of stale sweat wrapped its fingers around disinfectant and started a slow tango. The mop stick clanged against the sides of the metal bed as the woman resumed mopping. Rampyari jerked her hand away from the edge of the bed. It has been 2 days, and no bakshish, not even 10 rupees for chai. The woman put up two thick fingers. Hers was a well-to-do household where even the women wore chappals. Why was Durges being such a miser? Rampyari wondered. She stared at the woman's teeth. They were stained with gutka. The smell of tobacco joined the tango. The cleaning woman came closer. Rampyari shrunk away. The woman reached across Rampyari and picked up the jar of Horlicks malt from the small bedside table. She weighed it in her hands. Don't, you will soil it. Rampyari opened her mouth to say, but stayed quiet. What do you need this for? The cleaning woman turned to Rampyari with an accusing look. It's not like you are going to suckle a baby, which you anyway can't. The cleaning woman, holding the Horlicks jar, pressed closer to the bed. Rampyari was already at the edge of the bed. Durges would have known what to do, she thought. She nodded, and the cleaning woman secreted the Horlicks jar in a fold of her sari. Should I continue?
No, that's good. Thank you, Ram. I like this scene with these two characters because I really feel the two of them there. And I think, Ram, I think some of the writing here is some of the best I've seen of yours. I think the writing is terrific. It's detailed. You are concentrating on the actions of the characters. My big comment here is, okay, so I told the story about my work of genius that I gave to Barry Hanna, and he said it meandered like a drunk on a bender. Okay, so I didn't really know what was wrong with that story when it was criticized. I didn't know what it meant, when he said, "Where's the story?" It took me years. It was a traumatic experience, and I had to grapple with it over the course of many years. And what I finally came up with was I was writing a one-sided story about a protagonist who was victimized by the world. And that's all it was about. It was basically a story about me. I'm going to tell you the truth, Mom. The character was kind of like me. Okay. And so the story was about a character like me and me writing about my character's victimization. By the world, which is somehow unknowingly responsible for this victimization. Now, I don't want to get into an argument about whether victimization exists or doesn't exist. But one-sided stories don't work.
True, very true.
So the thing that happens is not that our protagonist has to be right. In fact, they're usually not right about the choices that they make. But our protagonist is not right. Our antagonist, I don't believe, is wrong. If we're writing stories about protagonists being right and antagonists being wrong, we're writing propaganda. And that's basically what I was writing. I was writing propaganda. The propaganda of I am right, but I've been victimized. And the world is wrong because it victimizes me. That's all I was writing. I was writing propaganda. And in the act of writing that, I was self-propagandizing myself about who I was. I was a victim. The world, and I was propagandizing what the world was. So I was making all these decisions already. This story had nothing to do with it. This is nothing what a story should be doing, it seems to me. It's not that maybe we want to say the world is a victimizer and we're a victim. Maybe we want to say we're a victimizer and the world is a victim. We can go ahead and think these things. I'm all for it, but I think we have to do it on our own time. When we write a story, what we need to do is we need to represent. So if we talk about protagonism and antagonism, they have to be equal forces. Remember I said the paragraphs? But it's like, basically they're equal forces. If this force is bigger and this force is smaller, the protagonist, when they clash, I don't wonder what's going to happen. Right?
Correct.
It's not because this doesn't exist. It's not because there are not greater forces and weaker forces in the world. There are, a piano falls from a building and the person's walking below. This is not a story that we wonder what's going to happen, right?
True.
If the antagonistic force, like in my story, there was me as the victim and the world was the thing that was victimizing me, that's not an equal story. We don't wonder what's going to happen.
Right.
So it just doesn't matter. So like the argument about whether there's victims and victimizers and all of these things, for my purposes, it just is, I don't bother to think about it because it's not going to be good writing and it's not going to be an engaging story. My motive is to write an engaging story that a reader cannot put down. That is a restriction on me, and it's even a restriction on what I'm able to think. But I will tell you that over time, using stories to represent equal forces has made me see the world in a different way.
That's interesting. Okay.
Because what we might see is, okay, whereas before I had, like your character here, you have a character here, she's had a mastectomy, she's had a vasectomy already, she goes home, her husband has a new wife. So she seems like she has no power.
Yeah.
And it seems like the world around her has an incredible amount of power to victimize her, including cancer, including she hasn't said her prayers and all of these things. The world is really conspired against her. When we understand that the forces have to be equal, Ram, this is so important. I'm going to say the most important thing I've ever said in these workshops. We have to find the power in our character that's equal to the forces against her.
Right.
That's why when we do that, we see the struggle going back and forth, but we have to see the protagonist being the protagonist. They are doing something. They do something in relationship to this world that's crushing them. And what they do is going to have some kind of measure of success, right? Because we need to bring our character to a point at the end of our story of where they make a choice. Not the choices made for them. The world beating down the character, that's not a choice of character. Okay, the character triumphing over the world, oh, I'm a Superman, I'm all powerful and I can beat up everybody. That's not a choice either.
Yeah.
We bring our character to a choice.
Right.
That they can make. And when they can make a choice, that is the triumph of the human spirit on the page. Yes, life was very, very hard. Sometimes very, very, very hard. But we brought them to a triumph of the human spirit in which they can choose for themselves where they go.
Right.
Having that, Ram, knowing that that's where we're going in our story is the drive of the story. So we have to see it apparent in the character. We're not engaged in, we're not trying to look at, voyeuristically watch, a situation of sadomasochism, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, that I agree.
This is, right? We don't want to watch sadomasochism because we don't want to think of ourselves basically in some sadomasochistic comedy.
Can just give me a minute. There is somebody at the door. I'll just be back in 10 seconds. Sorry for this.
Okay. Sure. What are we going to do? Abhinav is going to comment. Abhinav.
Of course, I have to have an opinion on everything.
Huh?
No, see, in some cases, writing can also be a social commentary, right? And what it is a social commentary on
Sorry for the
is
interruption. Yeah.
also, sorry, too late, Ram. Otis and I've hijacked your session.
It's all right.
No, I was saying, so it can also be social commentary, and it can be driven by several motivations, right? We see something and we feel strongly about it, and we want to comment on it, and we want to let our views be heard. And fiction is many times a very powerful way of getting our voice and our opinions across. I think the key lies in telling a story versus telling a narrative, right? And I think sometimes the desire to come out with a certain point of view overpowers the story. It becomes a narrative, an exercise in building a narrative. And I think that's where the key is, because you can hammer a message onto someone's head with a hammer, or you can find a way to their heart through the words. And the hammer is the easier tool of choice. The heart is the slightly tougher one, in my opinion.
Right. And like I equated, actually, if you're talking about, sometimes we write stories, let's say we write nonfiction or something like that, we make an argument. But I equate it with actually good argumentation too. So, just as we have a protagonist and an antagonist that are equal forces, so I think in an argument, we need to have, the authorial point of view is one side, that's the protagonist's force, but then the opposing force has to be equal to it. We have to represent both sides of the argument in order to make to actually add to the conversation, if that's what we want to do. If we want to, bully, the point of view, then we create what we call a straw man, right? So the straw man argument. Thinking about the straw man is useful. If we go back to your story, Ram, your main character is the straw man. Yeah. Right? So like you're not creating an argument with her. You're not showing the human spirit in her.
Actually, I found, after your feedback, I found a bigger issue with the primary character here. And that is, like you rightly pointed out, things are happening to her. She's not doing anything. She's being very passive. She's just going about her life, and things are happening to her, and she is doing nothing about it. Yes. She's not the one who is causing the action. Things are just happening to her, and we are just watching it.
That is a simple way to express all these other things that I've expressed. Yeah. She's passive. She's a victim. Things happen to her. She doesn't do anything. When Correct. You start to see that everything she does, everything she does, every action she does, just like every other human being, she does to survive. Now we have a very active character. Even when she complains, or even when she doesn't complain. One thing that a lot of writers, not to be too complicated about it, but our actions are both what we do and what we don't do. Yeah. Right? Not doing something is also an action. I tell this story a lot of times, but like, when back in my days, right, I would be at some bar and a fight would break out in the back, and I sit there and I drink my beer. It's not that I'm not doing anything. I'm sitting in my chair drinking my beer, right? I am not getting involved in that fight. That's an action. But that's a little complicated way to say it. But yes, but Ram, the big news is that when you're at this stage, so this was precisely the stage I was at in that story I told to Swetha. I had written the story about, it was my act of genius about how victimizing the world was, and my character was a victim of it, and boy, was life ever hopeless. That described my mentality. Barry Hannah told me that my story meandered like a drunk on a bender, and where's the story? And I said, God damn you, Barry Hannah, I'm going to write something that is going to do it just the stupid way that you think it should be done, Barry, is what I thought to myself. And so I had those characters. I had a character who wanted something. I had a character who resisted in getting what he wants. And I told that story. And it changed me a little bit. I was a long way from understanding how it changed me in relationship to the way I thought about the world and my own story. I had instead just written this story about other people that I imagined, that I drew upon life, and I found something there about the human spirit. I kept writing stories like that because I wanted to be successful. And after a while, it changed the way I thought about my own life.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it changed the way I thought about myself. And it changed the way I thought about everybody else, Ram.
Wow.
So you're at the cusp of doing really great work. Really great work.
Thank you. Yes, I have a lot of distance to cover, but yes, it's a good start. The good thing is that every time I get this feedback from you, I realize that, okay, there is something that this is what is missing. I'm able to identify that. Like this story, I was never very satisfied.
Yeah,
I was never satisfied.
There's wonderful writing in here. I love how particularized it is. I love the world that you're depicting here. It's depicted a little bit as if from a distance, you know, where we're sort of we're distant observers of, you know, this poor woman. The thing is, when she becomes a real protagonist, we don't have that distance. We're not watching her like we're looking, you know, at like we're at a zoo or something like that. We start dealing with, we have human beings on the page, and that's very important. We don't want to be aloof. We don't want to be sociologists, please. And no harm to anyone who's a sociologist. Please don't be a sociologist. Right.
I was just thinking that I tried to read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, and I'm told it's a fabulous book. I read about half, but my biggest problem in that is, maybe I'm reading it wrong, is that the main protagonist, I think his name is Pip, things are happening to him and he is not doing anything. I look at him and I say that, wow, what a lucky guy.
Yeah. Well,
the writing is good, of course, undoubtedly.
Yeah, and it's rich, and you know, there people make up, and also we didn't have TV, and we didn't have movies, and we didn't have you know, people putting. How many people are going to the movies today, and how many people are reading Great Expectations? People used to wait at the docks when the Dickens books would arrive.
Wow. Okay.
Right? But people wait now for the new Game Boy, you know, for the department store to open so they can buy the new video game. So, you know, things change a little bit.
True.
But I will underscore, when we push ourselves to never see any character as being passive, never seeing any character not doing something, including in what they don't do, which you actually have a little bit of this in this story. She's going to say something and she doesn't, right? She clearly feels the tentativeness of her survival, and that if she should speak or do something, then she won't survive. But that is action. That is not victimization.
Yeah. So this is very interesting, because even in the Bhagavad Gita, we talk about there's a very similar concept where not doing anything is also an action. We'll get to that.
Right. Absolutely. Sorry, I'm just looking. Abhinav, I didn't mean to put yours up here right in a second. I meant to, but I'm gonna put a little line on it so we'll change. I wanted this one. Okay, Abhinav. Oh, no, not Abhinav. Sorry. Where Ashvani? Where is your piece? This one, I think. Here we go. Ashvani is what I meant to say. Forgive me. Ashvani, tell me a little bit about this piece.
I don't know. I keep getting inspired by my friend Ram, who writes horror stories. So I thought I'd write a horror story. That's all.
Okay. Read, please read. I'm gonna have you read a bit, but if you could read up to that green mark. So let's read the beginning here.
Okay. A confounded hypothesis. The train stopped barely for a minute, as if in a hurry to get away. Amrit, his pack already strapped onto his back, climbed down the metal steps outside the compartment door to a low concrete structure, not long enough to serve the whole train, short though it was, with just 6 bogies. The engine and a couple of the leading bogies were outside the platform, while the last one jetted out the other end. He was the only disembarker, and there was no one waiting to board the train. A lone figure waved a green flag in the direction of the engine, and the moment the train started moving, scurried off into the small 2-room building housing all of the station. As the train disappeared into the distance, a pall of tomb-like silence engulfed the station, and Amrit was struck by the absence of any man-made sounds. So this was the Denkali forest. Occasionally, he heard an indiscernible animal cry emanate from the thick forest that stretched out on both sides of the station as far as he could see. To Amrit, the forest appeared very close, as if threatening to whelm the station. There was no one around. Even the guide who was supposed to meet him was not in sight. Instinctively, he reached for his mobile, stopping halfway when he remembered being told that there was no mobile connectivity in these parts. For a moment, he checked again for the station name on the signboard. Relieved that it was indeed the correct station, he decided to walk out of the station and wait for the guide. A few minutes later, he saw a dilapidated 4-wheel drive jeep drive up to the station entrance. Amrit's eyebrow cocked at seeing the diminutive man, barely 5 feet tall, that alighted from it. He wore a disheveled suit with his shirt's top button undone and his necktie askew. Amrit saw him walking hurriedly with his hand outstretched. "Dr. Sinha," he announced perfunctorily. Amrit took the offered hand with trepidation. The fingers were soft, supple, and tender, like an artist's, and the metacarpal bones felt like plastic. Amrit felt that he had grasped a half-thawed fish fillet and withdrew his hand with a shudder, suppressing a strong urge to wipe his hands on his jeans.
Well, Abhinav, when we teach you to write a story, we are really going to look forward to it, because this is just wonderful. This beginning here, it's fabulous. You might. This is so real. I mean, I know that you know what it's like to take a train into the jungle and have that train leave and have that overwhelming silence be all that's left. I've been lucky enough to have almost this exact experience in the Amazon, where I took a boat. I was told I wanted to go to a town, but I was told that it doesn't go there. It only goes to this town. And I was like, well, there's definitely going to be boats at that town that go the rest of the way, I said to myself. I took the boat to this town. I got off on the dock. The boat left, and there was nothing there. Nothing. It was just jungle. There was a concrete, the town had a concrete slab where people would bring in the coffee and lay it out, or the cocoa, whatever, to dry. That was it. That's all they had. So I know this place, and I know that you know it. And the way you examine the nuance of an experience is just wonderful, and with language and sentences that just draw me along.
Thank you.
Can I say something? Sorry to interrupt, but I have to say this. I really enjoyed the paragraph where the guide comes in and the main character, he shakes his hand, and you often speak about engaging all the senses, and here the sense of touch has been explored, and it is not, and the way it has been explored here, it is a very unique kind of experience. It is not that okay, his hands were clammy, his hands were hard, or there were calluses on his hands, which is very stereotypical. Here it is not stereotypical, and it has been explained in a way where it makes it very real. I really love that.
Thank you, Ram.
Yeah. And I love that he's I'm expecting a guide, and I am a guide, but I'm also a doctor, a surgeon. I'm also a doctor. That's a great, very economical line. Also a surgeon. Ashwani, it's just wonderful. Yeah, I mean, whatever the consciousness you go into when you're writing these pieces, particularly in the beginning of your work, before we get to, now we need to get the story going. Now we need to get the conflict engaged. But these things are just wonderful. I mean, who I was thinking that you should read? I do not suggest this for everyone, but maybe you should read the short stories of Paul Bowles.
Paul Bros.
Bowles, Bowles. Okay. There's one story in particular that I'm thinking of. It's called A Distant Episode that you could look up.
Okay.
Is it The Distant Episode? Yeah, it is. But it is also basically a victim story. Okay. But anyway, he's a wonderful writer. He doesn't only write victim stories, but this story ends up having the same problem that we were talking about with Ram's story. From this point onward, basically this doctor who's arrived in the station is simply victimized. It doesn't matter how macabre that victimization is. It's hopeless, right? It's hopeless. So he's the character that we've basically signed on for. We are enjoying being in his consciousness, and the truth is that the reader is developing a sympathetic resonance with this character, going along with them, really enjoying it, but your character does not have a chance. That's what the victim story does. The character doesn't have a chance. The antagonistic force is so strong. The character, in this case, the protagonist, is so weak that it's a foregone conclusion what happens. So obviously very early in this story, I saw that the action, particularly that of the protagonist, was not getting on the page. He wasn't really manifesting himself as a human being, a full human being. He's just a straw man who's coming into this situation to be victimized, a kind of ritual sacrifice. And the forces against him are too powerful. What it means is that actually, even as macabre as it is, the story is flat, is the way I would describe it. Where we start, he's a victim in the beginning, he's a victim at the end. We just want to engage. When you watch a horror film, right, you always have everyone running away, right? And someone survives, usually. One person survives in a horror film. And that's the person that we understand to be the central figure. And we see how desperate their situation is because everyone else falls, right? So it's an absolutely desperate situation that they triumph over by surviving. So even horror stories, use these forms. Even the story that I wrote that meandered like a drunk on a bender, was a story of a victim. It was a horror story. If this is a horror story, it was also a horror story, right? The world is horrible, and look, it just crushed me. See? So I want, and you've done it some with your stories where you've taken on the task. You can write these sentences, you have these insights, but yes, it becomes a little bit harder because now we have these dynamic forces, and it can become a little bit harder to manage both sides of them for our sentences. For those of us who write these wonderful sentences, that's not me, but like you, Swetha, you write these wonderful sentences. For those of you who are great sentence writers, you'll have a little bit more problem sometimes as you adopt this other kind of meta drive, this lucid part where you set these two characters against each other. You have a lot of other problems too, because you'll have dynamics and scene that we'll have to look at carefully and make sure that you're always representing these characters as being fully on the page and not end up doing something that's rote. So there's a lot of responsibility that's added when we really engage in telling a true story. But I think you're, as you've always been, well up to the task. So, and considering that it is a victimization story, it's still a very good one because your writing is so good. But what's the saying? Sometimes your greatest strength is your greatest weakness, Ashwani.
I'll work on it.
Yeah. The thing is, you write such great sentences and you drive into this consciousness so well, that people will let you get away with it. And by people, I don't mean me.
No, I'll work on it.
Yeah.
I had one doubt about your comments.
Yeah.
If you go a little down the page.
Further?
Yes, further. This place where you say space. No, up. Up.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So do you mean that some other scene or some show or tell part should have been interspersed here?
So I'm like I said, I use everything at our disposal, our brushes, right? So the paragraph is one of our brushes. It basically represents something. It's a kind of brush stroke. I'm basically saying there should be a space. I use everything, and then I often don't use things too. Like I try not to use italics. I try not to use, I use all the tools that are available, and I don't use tools when they make it too complicated. So I use a few simple tools. Paragraphs, I paragraph for the antagonist and protagonist. That helps me organize my thoughts, right? It helps me concentrate the reader's attention on this character than this character. Even though I use a point of view, I write them differently. I also use spaces, right? So basically I'm talking about separating the text just for the space.
Okay.
I always separate the text. Maybe I would change it in a final document, but I can't see why. When I change characters, location, or time. Because that helps me. It's like writing scenes in a movie. It helps me to create some separation, because then when I look at it to revise it, I can make sure that this scene is working. Every scene has a new location, a new time, a new set of characters. If you're in the same location, it's the same time, and someone walks in, this is a new scene to me, because the dynamic of the scene has to change completely. This is about 2 characters, and this is about 3 characters. It's a completely different scene. The emotion of it is completely different. And I want to make sure that I'm moving in chunks, basically, where the reader is really recognizing that. So that's a long, long story to say, just hit the return button, drop it down, put a little mark in there like that if you want, to tell us that time has passed. It helps the reader.
Understood.
Okay, great. These are wonderful pieces. I really appreciate the writing in all of these pieces. It's very high level, and this is a really, really important conversation to have. It's what we're talking about here is easier said than done. I can promise you. It was, for me, this transition. When I talk about writing that story and writing the next story, the transition for me to really understand what I'm talking about here with protagonists and antagonists took me years. I mean, I'm still engaged in that process. It is a really big deal. It's not something that happens overnight like that. It's something that it is something that we should begin to practice And I promise, at least my point of view is, if you start to practice it, you will start to experience it. And when you start to experience this change of representing the protagonist and the antagonist as equals and as active characters acting with their own motivation to get what they want specifically, it will begin to change your life and the way you look at the world. I think so. Abhinav, you wanted to ask some questions?
We can go over them perhaps I don't know, next week, or if you have maybe. So okay, so here, for example, where you have a circle and connected these 3 or 4 words, once, would, could.
Right.
I'm not sure what you meant by that, by this.
Okay. Yeah, good. So again, it's a question of tools. So there are tools I use and tools I don't, because some I think are effective and some I don't. So when we start saying would or could, right, these are conditional phrases that don't really have a concrete, there's nothing concrete there when we begin to talk about could or should. So I try and get rid of conditionality because I want to have concrete things happening on the page so that the reader can have the imagination of those experiences. One way I express it sometimes is, if someone writes something that doesn't happen, Ram actually had a sentence like this about something that didn't happen. I try to counsel myself first, of course. Everything I say, I try to bring to myself. But we should try to avoid negation. We should try to avoid conditionality. And instead, we should write what does happen. I mean, that's something that's actually so effective, I think, in Ashvani's opening. When we hear that, he's writing all things that do happen, right? Everything that's happening, and we're following along in that narrative of all things that do happen, not what could have happened, what should have happened, and what didn't happen. And it's very effective once we draw the reader into that. So it's a small comment, but I would avoid it. I would writing these conditional phrases, writing what doesn't happen is easy for us, right? Like, this is a small example. I walked into the room, she didn't smile. Okay, so what did she do? You see how that loops a little back into this idea of having characters be active? I don't want to write what she's not doing. I want to write what she does do, because I want her to be an active, motivated character who's doing things because of her motivation, whatever that is. Does that make a little sense? It's a very small example.
I see. Interesting. Yeah.
Even if she, compressed her lips, right? I want to concentrate on the actions that are happening, not those that are not happening. I don't want to.
Got it.
Same with could and should and all of that.
Oh, so. Got it. Thanks.
And even though it's easy to write those things, and I do it all the time, so I write it, and then when I see it and read it, I notice it, and I do just like I did with yours. I circle it like that, and then when I go to rewrite, I rewrite it. I rewrite it so that it's going to be active.
Okay, great. Thanks, Otis. And we are at the top of the hour. And thank you, everyone, for joining in.